Because you got to stop and think. We had a major fire, say around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when the tanks are down because of heavy use during the day. It wouldn't take long to drain that tank and you could lose the town. And I've been through losing one shopping centers.
We will store within the pressure zone the maximum demand plus the fire flow. Essentially, what that means is that during the maximum day, we will be able to provide all of the water that the citizens of the city use and still hold in reserve the calculated fire flow that is needed to protect that pressure zone.
The Preliminary Design Review, or PDR, identified the storage need for the entire city and for each zone. The information is in Table 1, broken down by maximum day storage and fire storage. The table indicates that the city has enough storage to provide the maximum day demand and still have fire reserve storage. But can that be said for each zone? Here again we see our reservoirs and the city map with white lines roughly marking our 8 pressure zones. Outlined in green are Vancil and Hilltop. The 3 zones identified here with green stars are supplied by Vancil and Hilltop, and so have enough storage for both maximum day demand and fire reserve. As for the rest, on an average day in the southeast, the Campton Heights Reservoir can provide the water needed and maintain the fire reserve for zones 6, 7, and 8. But that is about the limit. The Preliminary Design Review numbers indicate that on days of high usage, there is not enough storage to maintain the fire reserve without pumping. The numbers also indicate that even on an average day in Zone 1, the 2 Stewart Street reservoirs may not hold enough to maintain the recommended fire reserve without pumping. And in the Northwest, the Holman tank simply does not have adequate storage capacity to meet fire flow requirements for Zone 5. As noted, Zone 3 uses water stored in Vancil Reservoir, which can supply 2 days of maximum usage and fire reserve for all of the 5 northern zones. However, fire flow is more than just storage, and this is important to know in relation to Zone 3. The water for this zone is delivered by a booster station rather than gravity flow. And even with all the pumps running, the booster station cannot deliver the recommended fire flow for that zone. Fortunately, the project to replace Holman with storage in Vancil includes pump upgrades, so the fire flow issues in both zones will be addressed by those distribution improvements. And in Zone 1, we may disagree on how to do it, but we all agree that the Stewart Street Replacement Project must address Zone 1 fire flow needs. However, there is no project in the 5-year or even the draft 20-year capital improvement program to address the fire storage issue in the southeast. Besides storage and right-sized pumps, fire flow also requires pipes large enough to deliver the water. This is a 2008 report I found online. We are very fortunate to have a dedicated group of volunteer firefighters. This report mentions fire flow in Fortuna. It says the city currently has areas where fire flow capacities need to be improved. Some older sections of the city's distribution system are in need of replacement.
Hopefully nothing major will fail on us before we can replace it, but we were looking at all those critical things within the water system as we're talking about this evening, besides these reservoir projects that we're going to have to take care of, from water mains to pumps to backup generator systems to what have you, that we already have in place that we're going to have to replace when they become of age. And as the City Council is aware, we had a 20-year look-ahead review of our infrastructure for both water and sewer. And we've developed at least a model right now, a 20-year capital improvement project program.
Here is a printout of our water system's draft 20-year capital improvement program. It contains about 350 projects. At the top are the projects at the well site, reservoir sites, and booster stations. Below these are listed the waterline projects. Good news, about half of these are water lines we should not need to replace in the next 20 years. Bad news is that over half of the remaining waterline projects, those in the yellow area, are identified as overdue projects. Hopefully, this draft overstates the problem, but the draft 20-year CIP shows it to be potentially a $3 million problem.
One of the things that was not mentioned in the presentation, and that was fire protection. I didn't hear anything about that during the construction phases or anywhere in the presentation at all. My question is, at least one of them, is that you mentioned that during the construction phase at Stewart there'd be a reduced amount of inventory of water at the site. And you said there was an element of risk as to whether there could be a catastrophic, and this is a hypothetical, a catastrophic occurrence if something failed and you would not have adequate water for Zone 1. I'm just wondering whether in your evaluation at Stewart Street, whether there's been adequate consideration of the risk to fire protection for the downtown area. And that's just a question.
We also mentioned that the Stewart Street site included concerns over operation of the city's water system during construction. And primarily this was centered around the dependability and reliability of the system during the construction period. And the reason for that is that in order to construct a new site at Stewart, we would first have to deconstruct the existing storage reservoirs. Obviously, when those reservoirs are no longer there, we have to figure out how we deliver flows to Pressure Zone 1 and other areas of the city.
Appendix C of the staff report, prepared for the January 2009 special meeting at the River Lodge, states that the 8-inch water line between Vancil and Stewart cannot provide adequate fire flow during construction. To provide fire flow during construction, the pumps at the source must be running, and a PRV valve at the Stewart booster station must be operating properly.
Our ability to trust that we can move water from Vancil down into Pressure Zone 1 suffers significantly. This would essentially be similar to implementing the construction period operational mode that I mentioned was our major concern over the Stewart Street site. We would be implementing that operational mode permanently.
There is another way to provide fire flow to Zone 1.
Instead of having all the water come back down through a pump station or a control valve at the Stewart Street site, I'd suggest that there be another line to someplace else so you'd have some more redundancy rather than having just one pipeline be your whole supply.
In records released by the city, there is an estimated cost of $285,000 to run a pipeline via Christian Ridge to Zone 1. According to Appendix C, one of the most important, if not the primary concern in operating the city's water system is providing fire protection. The staff report also states that the ability to provide adequate fire flows to Pressure Zone 1 is considered a non-negotiable, absolute necessity at all times. Zone 1 currently relies on Vancil Reservoir on high-use days and for emergencies. However, as noted by an engineer in 2003, the connection between Stewart Street and Vancil has never operated as intended. and in a memo this year, the city engineer noted that using Vansel at this time requires manual operation of a valve that must be monitored at frequent intervals. The proposed water line would address these issues. The water line down Christian Ridge will make the 4 million gallons of storage in Vansel available to fight a fire in the downtown area.